everybody. Hello, welcome to this day. My name is Chris Gordon. I am the Programming Manager for Readings, and I am delighted to be able to welcome you here on behalf of Readings and on behalf of Plum Publishing. What a treat I have for you. I'm going to introduce you to someone that's quite extraordinary, a GP, but someone who has made it his life's mission to pass down the stories and recipes that he has known, that are part of his blood, I guess, part of his being, who has passed on these recipes so that you, wherever you are, can learn to preserve the Italian way. Pietro, welcome to this Zoom platform.
Yeah, thank you very much, Wayne. You're so energetic and so full of passion.
I really am.
It's a pleasure to be here.
Pietro, I've showed him just before, but I want to make sure everybody can see my T-shirt.
Yeah.
On here it says, I stand with the Salami King. And the reason that I've got this T-shirt on today is because many years ago there used to be a salami festival in Northcote. And my partner used Pietro's book, his very first original one, to go into this competition, and he was so nervous that I got these T-shirts made up and all of our friends and family wore them. I stand with the Salami King, but today I'm wearing it, of course, to honour you, Pietro, you who have passed on these traditions so that people like me, people from England, for goodness sake, can wear something like this proudly.
Well done.
So tell me a little bit about how it all started. It started in 2007 when you decided to create a book, a self-published book called Preserving the Italian Way. And this book went bonkers. Is that right?
Absolutely. I think that in 2011 I had young children. They're obviously older now. A number of my friends had young families, and we'd all grown up in the 60s and 70s. I'm 70 now.
You look good.
Thank you. Where it wasn't so cool to be an Italian or later on a Greek or whatever. And so therefore we passed through a stage where a lot of my generation had actually actively suppressed their background. And so therefore our parents, our uncles and aunties, unfortunately were dying because, my dad was born in 1906, so he would have been 118 now. So that generation was dying out. But we really loved the food that our parents gave us, although no one else or very few other people recognised it. So, the conversation used to be, oh, look, I want to make salamis. Do you know how to make salamis? No, I don't. My mother makes salamis, but I don't know how to do it. Or, I'd go along, I was a GP, and, one of my patients would bring along some cheese. I had a patient who in Italy, she was a shepherdess. And so they would make their own cheese, and she'd bring the cheese. I would spend many, many weekends with my relatives in the country making sauce, making salami, and even all the strange things. And one of the conversations that I have in the book is when I went to school, my mother used to make her own bread, and she used to give me 2 slabs of bread, which were doorstoppers, and then inside she'd put aubergines under salt and oil, which is a really beautiful thing. But you can imagine going to school in 1962, 63 in Malvern, white Anglo-Saxon
area. The land of the Vegemite sandwich.
Tell me. And I absolutely was desperate to have a Vegemite sandwich, and everyone would look at me strange. Then if I go forward 30 years, my son went to Wesley. And so when he went to school, he would go to school with a great chunk of bread, but he would take a little salad and his own olive oil and his own balsamic vinegar, and he'd sit down and he'd put a little tablecloth.
Oh my God.
And he'd have lunch.
Stop it.
And of course, everyone who had the Vegemite sandwiches wanted to have his food.
I want to have his food.
Yeah. So basically I started collecting a whole lot of recipes. And initially I thought I'll just go, we were going to Italy that year, I'll just buy something off the shelf that has different recipes. So I was in Calabria, couldn't find one. I thought, oh, well, that's because maybe we're not advanced. I went to Naples to a number of bookshops. There's one there which was Feltrinelli, which is like a Dimmicks or a Readings, and, very famous chain, didn't know one. But everywhere I went and said, look, have you got this book? they'd say, no, I haven't, but my uncle makes the best whatever, salami, cheese.
Can I interrupt there? Is this an Italian kind of tradition that's been passed down through generations, that every Italian at whatever age says, no, my family make the best?
Absolutely, absolutely. Well, you know, when you think about it, if you come from a very peasant background, there's not much that you can be proud of or brag about. So you brag about a particular recipe, or you brag about, well, I don't know what else there is, to be honest, because, you know, there isn't, it's whatever you could do with your hands. There's not that much to brag about. So having a recipe that has, that somehow is better than somebody else's, I mean, that's just, that's gold, you know, that's yeah. So anyway, I went then in the north of Italy, I went to Florence, the same story. I went to Treviso, I had friends in Treviso in the north. I couldn't find a book that actually talked about preserves. So I thought, damn it. So I came back and I started talking to lots and lots of older people. And in that stage, they were, you know, sort of 60s, 70s, 80s. And of course, it's always the same story. I'd say, look, you know, how do you do your eggplants? You know, your melanzane here. Oh, well, you know, you cut them up and then what do? You put salt on them. Well, how much? Well, you know, just as much as it takes. Well, no, how much do you put on? And how long do you leave it for? Oh, well, you know how it is, you know. So getting these recipes was like extracting teeth. But it became very obvious. Yeah, indeed. It became very obvious very quickly that there are basic principles of preserving.
Yeah.
And so I suppose then I thought, well, what I'll do is I'll just print. I had a patient who was a publisher, and he used to do biographies or autobiographies. And so I printed 200 copies just for friends. And I was friends at that stage with Daniela Mollica, who was Slow Food. And I said, look, I wonder if there's a market for this. And she says, well, go and talk to this, you know, this particular shop. So I took them down there. And I said, I don't know how much how much I should put on. And he said, oh, look, leave them here with me. How many have you got? 5. Okay, put them here, $39.95. And I swear, literally an hour later, he rang me up and he says, have you got any more books? Because I've sold them out. And I thought, fantastic. This is ridiculous. So
that first run through of your old book before it was found by this gorgeous publishing house, Plum, that sold 45,000 copies.
Absolutely.
I mean, that's crazy for a self-publisher.
Yeah, and that's no marketing. That's just me in the back room at work, via email, originally by fax and then by email. And to be honest, in the last probably 3 to 4 years, I haven't actively pushed it or marketed or even supplied it, except to Readings and a couple of other long-term suppliers or long-term distributors.
Well, we at Readings love it. And I'm so excited that you've got this new edition now.
Absolutely.
That's still got all of the terrific stories in it, because one of the things that I've always loved about your recipes is that you have preferenced them all with some sort of story from your family or from friends. And it just seems to make it much more heartfelt, much more about the Italian way.
Well, and that's what I was trying to preserve. Yeah. So obviously there's a bit of a play on words of preserving, which is what we're doing, but also in maintaining. And I suppose from my point of view, it was also an opportunity to tell people about, my parents and their journey, which was a journey that practically every migrant coming to Australia has. But I think that we tend to forget, after 1 or 2 generations, we forget that it takes an incredible amount of courage to leave.
Your father came out here in what, 1937?
Exactly right. And he left his wife, who he didn't know was pregnant at that stage, with 4 children, and they reunited in 1948. So 10 years they were separated, and for 5 years they didn't communicate because they were both illiterate. And then, so when Dad left Italy, and the village wasn't the cute little villages that you see on Netflix or whatever. I mean, they were very, very basic. It was the feudal system still in Calabria, particularly in our area, or my parents' area. So then Mum came out, and then and a whole lot of other families came out, and they started you couldn't find salamis, you couldn't find pasta, you couldn't find, the only place you could find olive oil was in the chemist because it was a medicinal product. They started growing a whole lot of stuff for themselves, and they started reproducing what they had in Italy. I mean, my first memory when I was about 2.5 or 3 is the pig kill. The day when there were 6 families that came out from Italy at the same time, and each weekend a different family would kill a pig, and then that family would give away all it made. So it wouldn't actually keep any of it. But then the next weekend, they'd meet with another family, and it would give away. So at the end of the season, you ended up with a pig, but from 6 different people. Yeah. And over a period of time, there was just this continual reinforcement of friendship, of camaraderie, of family, of food, of values. It was great. And I suppose that went through a bit of a dip, probably in the early 70s, early 80s even. Most of those traditions were, like we were seen a bit strange because Dad would do salamis in the shed at home or make his own wine. He almost blew up the kitchen because he made his own grappa one year. The thing blocked and it blew up. Luckily, he walked out. But we do our own olives, and I still get lots and lots of questions. In fact, today I'd like to talk about.
Let's do that. Okay, I want to say that I can't even imagine how proud your parents would be that you are here when after such a journey. They must have been extraordinarily proud of you because, they took such a gamble on Australia, and we're so grateful that these families did that, because now there's such strong traditions. There's such an appetite for the food that the Italians have been creating since the beginning of time.
There's that, and there's also the opportunity to my children. I mean, I've got 3 boys. They're all, they're all intelligent. They're all passionate. They're all generous. And that is on the basis of a foundation that my parents gave me, and then hopefully I've given them. And I'm hoping that they give to their children, my 3 granddaughters, moving forward. And it's a combination of, tradition, of culture, of heritage, a certain amount of wealth, obviously, as the generations go on, there's whatever, but also that belonging. Yeah. So anyway, I'm sure a lot of people...
Let's go on to these olives, because already people are saying to me, talk to me about olive oil. They want to hear all about how you perhaps create your own olive oil, and if you don't, what olive oil are you using? And then we need to go on to the olives, and then we've got to talk about tomatoes. We've got so much to get through.
We have. Okay. Olive oil. Well, I think that the answer is if you can get a good Australian olive oil, and you can, even Cobram Estate, which is a commercial variety, it is current. You can get this year, which means that it's not rancid. It's certified as olive oil. It's not a blend of olive oils. There was a period when olive oil was brought in from overseas, particularly from Italy, where it would be sourced from Turkey and Greece and Spain and everywhere else, and it was atrocious. So I think if you're going to buy an olive oil, make sure you buy a good olive oil. And if you can afford it, make sure there are a number of really great small producers, even on the Mornington Peninsula, but you've got to pay for it. You might be paying $20 or $30 or $40 a litre. That is fantastic with things like tomatoes, salads, and that's just raw olive oil. And then traditionally what you would do, a classic thing that I used to always do is some fresh bread that Mum made, put on olive oil, lots of it on the bread, raw, a little sprinkle of either a squash tomato or a little bit of oregano, and you eat it. And it's just fantastic. Delicious. So olive oil, you should have 2. You should have the one that you normally cook with or use, and then you should have a salad olive oil. But really, I can honestly say that Australian olive oil is on par with anywhere in the world. So if you're living in Tuscany, don't buy Australian olive oil, buy Tuscan olive oil. But if you're living in Australia, buy Australian olive oil. But one of the things that's happening now everywhere, and it happened probably 20 years ago, is that people started planting olive trees.
And you planted them, didn't you? You planted some in your GP sort of office.
Yes. I had them at work, and people used to nick them all the time. I'd go out there, and they're just about ready, and I'd go like Friday afternoon. I'd go back Monday morning. They're all gone. So one year I thought, this is ridiculous. So I actually bought some blue food dye, and I sprayed all the trees with the blue food dye and put a sign saying, please don't eat, they're poisonous. And it worked. They left them there. But since then, I'll grow other olive trees on my property in Balnarring, so I don't worry about it. But anyway, the thing is that a number of questions, different varieties, it doesn't really matter, but they're all olives.
How do we know that they're ripe? How do we know that they're ready?
That's the first question. So these here, I'm sure you can see them, you probably can't, but these here, I just picked them from a tree that I've got on the balcony. They're too green, but I just did it for the demonstration. So how do you know when they're ripe? When the first 2-3% of the olives are starting to turn black, the green ones are at their peak, right? If you want to let them go black, that's fine, but you wouldn't pick them until the first of the olives start to go black, which means that the first of the olives are starting to almost become a bit overripe. So that's when you can pick your green olives. And if you want to leave the black olives, you leave them right to the end of the season. So if you've got a tree, you might want to have, you pick them. So you pick the olives. So this is a really, really simple recipe, and it's literally infallible.
And we're going into olive period now, aren't we? This is around about the next month or so.
Yeah, a little bit early, about another 2-3 weeks, 4 weeks will be the green ones. You'll start to get the odd black one coming through. That's when you pick them.
Pop your nets up now, everyone. Pop your nets up.
Okay, so basically you pick your olives, and there's many ways to do it. You can crush them and also there's probably 20 or 30 different ways of doing it. I won't go into all the difficult.
Which is your favourite? I want to know your favourite.
Well, this is my favourite because it's simple, right? And I can do it with my granddaughters, but they can help me. It's so simple. So you get the olives, you put them in a jar.
And the jar's been sterilised and sort of cleaned.
Just cleaned.
Yeah.
Now, the important thing is with any of the preserves, apart from things like bottled tomatoes and whatever, but your aubergines, your, cheese, salami, whatever it is that you're preserving, there's two basic requirements. One of them is acidity. In other words, you have to have an acid environment, which is antibacterial, and salt.
Yeah.
Okay. So if you want to have that, then how do you add acidity? So you put a slice of lemon, you put it on top of the jar. Can you see that I've actually put it on top of the jar?
It's almost like a lid.
It is. It's exactly right. Because what that does is it does two things. It turns the water that I'm going to put in there acid, which is important, but also it stops the olives from floating to the top. Because as soon as they float to the top, they float to the top, they become brown and they go soft.
Yeah, right.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you've done that. I often put in a little chili just because I like to. I might put in some of this. This is actually, you can't smell it, but this is actually fennel flower seed. So basically I pick my fennel, even for making salami, right, because I don't like crunching on the fennel seed. I'm not really happy about it. So I pick the fennel in January, February down at the farm, and I pick them when the flowers are bright yellow. So this is actually fennel pollen almost.
The smell would be incredible.
Intense flavour and beautiful aroma. So I put a little tiny bit in there, right? Or you can basically, if you've got fennel growing at home, you just put a sprig in. And again, these are all things that are in the garden. You'll find that the fennel is at the same time as the olives, and the fennel seed is at the same time as the salamis. It's interesting how, the basil is at the same time as tomatoes. It's interesting how nature has decided that things are complementary, and all you've got to do is walk out into the garden and have them. So you've got your chili, you've got your lemon, you've got your fennel, and you make up a solution of 100 grams of salt per litre of water. Now, if you want to do it the traditional way, you have to get a really, really freshly laid egg from a chook, preferably in your own garden, and float it in a thing of water until it comes, and you keep adding salt until it floats. And it actually turns out that that's 100 grams per litre of water. So I just find that it's easier to use the scales. Yeah. And then I boil it, bring it up to boiling point. This should be boiling water. So what you're doing is you're putting just boiled brine, and you cover the, sorry, you can't see that. You cover the olives, and you can see that it's coming to the top, right? You notice that there's no olives floating there, so they're not coming through. While this is really, really hot, you seal it, and that's it.
And how long are we leaving that for?
6 to 8 weeks. Okay.
And you don't need to change the water or anything?
No.
I love this.
Now, the thing is that with this recipe, an olive tastes like an olive. You only do the water changing and whatever if you want to get rid of a lot of that olive flavour. Well, to me, it's like, well, hang on, I'm pickling olives. Why would I want them to taste like nothing, sort of thing, if you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Now, the important thing is that when you open this in 6 or 8 weeks' time, right, it'll fizz like a bottle of soda water, right? Now, what's happened between now and in 6 weeks is that those olives have fermented, and the acid and the oils in the olives have changed, and they've gone from extremely bitter to slightly bitter and tasty. So that gas that's coming out is not that the olives are off. And I've had a lot of people say, oh, look, I did them, but they all went off and I threw them out because when I opened the lid, they all went fizzy. No, that's normal. So you open the lid, let it fizz, put it in the fridge for a day, let the gas come out, and then you can eat them. And they'll last like that. I've actually opened bottles after 3 years, and the olives are absolutely crunchy hard.
Fantastic.
Now, you can then wait another 4 weeks, 5 weeks, and they're black olives. Same thing, identical. Yes, you can change the water. There's recipes in the book about, because the thing about the recipes in the book are they're other people's recipes. I didn't make any of them up. So they're basically recipes that a family member has given them, and they've just stuck to it come what may.
Yeah.
And so therefore, some people crush them, for instance. Now that means that you can eat them earlier because that all those bitter flavors and the aloic acid and palmatic and all the rest of it leach out and ferment earlier. Some people change it. Hungarians, as it turns out, I've got this recipe, and they put in garlic and celery and parsley and lemon juice, for instance. Again,
the reason that Pietro is bringing up Hungarian is because I'm married to a Hungarian, but let me tell you, they complicate everything.
Well, this is simple. And then the last thing you do with them is the really, really, really ripe ones at the very end of the season.
Yeah.
And you've forgotten about them, and you go out there and you think, my God, there's 5 kilos of black olives, like black olives, is, simply you pick them, you put them in a bucket, one of these buckets like this one here that I've got.
Yep.
And you put a handful of salt per layer, like a lot of salt, not completely but very salty. And every day you just agitate them. And after about 7 or 8 days,
shake them around.
After 7 or 8 days, you'll find that they'll start to get a little bit bubbly and frothy. They're fermenting. And after about 10 days, they'll start to become quite sweet. And they are fantastic. And those you basically drain, let them dry for a good 24 hours, preferably outside. My mum used to put them in the wood-fired oven at the very, very end when the oven was completely almost cold. She'd put in her olives, and that would dry the olives. And then you put a little bit of oil and in a jar and leave them in the fridge, and they last you all year. And they're great for pizzas. They're great for having, not fresh because they're pickled, etc., etc. So that's your olives. We've got to talk about
fantastic,
tomatoes.
Fantastic. So, we're at the end of tomatoes now. We're in autumn now, and people are just picking their very last green tomatoes, I guess, at this point. There we go. So what do we do with the green? What do we do with this?
Well, green tomatoes, whether it's green tomatoes, whether it's zucchini, whether it's eggplant, whether it's chocos, they're all pickled, whether it's cucumber slices, all the things that get left over, they're all pickled in exactly the same way. And again, it's the same principle, salt and acid. So what you do is, there's a tomato, you basically slice them into 2 and 3 little slices like this, 2 or 3 millimeter slices. All right, can you see that?
We can.
And then what you do is, what I've done here is I've actually got 2 containers that are identical. Now, the reason for that is that I can have whatever I'm pickling in the bottom one. So what I would do is I'd put the tomatoes in there. Imagine that's 2 or 3 kilos. I'd put salt on there. Every layer I'll put a handful of salt. Then I'll put the second one on and fill it up with water.
It weighs it down.
Absolutely. And the beauty of it is that, in fact, there's no little gaps then because they basically fit into each other. So at the end...
There's a top tip. Yeah, I like it.
Right.
And then that's just in your laundry, is it? Do you just pop that in your laundry when you're done?
Yeah, your laundry, exactly right. Yeah. And so at the end of the 24 hours, you'll find it'll start up there. I can see it. And slowly, it'll go down and it'll almost flatten them out. And you'll probably find that it'll get down to about 20%. In fact...
So I guess the thing that you can do is you don't need to have that many tomatoes. You could actually be using smaller bowls, but the same sort of principle.
Absolutely. Yeah, sure. Yeah. And so therefore what you do after 24 hours, you drain the brine, right? You take it out and it'll drain off. If you want to, I often mound them in the middle. So what I'll do is I'll make a little mound.
Yep.
And then put the weight back on again, right? And then after 24 hours, drain the brine and then pour over vinegar. So you've got the salt, you pour over vinegar. And you
what type of vinegar? There's so many types of vinegar.
Ideally, it'd be a homemade vinegar, but it's got to be strong. So, white, and preferably white, not brown or whatever, because otherwise whatever you use or whatever you're pickling will go brown, which is not as nice. Like the eggplants are nice if they're white rather than brown.
So none of that malt vinegar, straight into the white vinegar.
The malt vinegar is perfectly fine, as long as it's strong, which it is, and it's sterile, which it is, because if you get a wine vinegar, there may be some yeast in it, but if you get a malt vinegar, it isn't. So you put it on, you mix it, and you leave it for about an hour. And what you want to happen is for all those pressed tomatoes, eggplant, zucchini, chocos, whatever it is, to soak up the vinegar. And then same story. Put the lid on, put the next one on, put the weight, do it on, drain it.
Perfect.
Do it again. And then at the very end, you'll end up, as I say, with about 10% or 20% of the original volume. So then you pick them up and you squeeze them and you'll still get something coming out. You put them into a bucket like this and you pour olive oil. It's got to be a good quality olive oil. People sometimes, and if you buy them, they use sunflower oil or canola oil. I think that the olive oil adds a really lovely flavour to it.
Some lushness.
So, absolutely. And in fact, there's even I wouldn't use a $50 a litre olive oil, but I certainly would use cobram, and it would actually add a significant flavour to the pickle. So then you put olive oil, and then you basically do what you want. You can put in chili if you want to, chili flakes. You might put oregano. Obviously, you'd have garlic. If you want this mixture to look more attractive, you might decide that you're going to slice up some capsicums and mix with the chili. Okay, so then you'll have the classic Italian flag of red, white, and green. You might decide that which is always important. So then you basically put the olive oil, and you let it soak, because what it'll do is it'll draw in the olive oil, and then you put it in your jars. And this is important. Whenever you put these sort of things in jars, always put a little bit of olive oil at the bottom. Yeah. Otherwise, what will happen is that as you jam them in, you'll end up with air pockets at the bottom, and it'll go mouldy. Yeah. So you put maybe a quarter of it olive oil, then you put in your pickles or your eggplants or whatever, and you press it down until, and I won't, I'm not sure if you can see it. You can't see it. Can you see that?
Yeah, I can. It looks fantastic.
Okay. So basically,
so it was an hour in the vinegar, wasn't it? So once you've done
24 hours.
24 hours.
Yeah.
So is that 24 hours?
Sorry, you're right. Okay, an hour in the vinegar.
Oh, an hour.
Then you put this on again.
That's right.
You do the same process for 24 hours. So it's 24 hours under salt, and then 24 hours under vinegar. But you let the vegetables soak up the vinegar before you put the weight on, right? And then at the end, you then put in your oregano, whatever. Another thing that would be nice to put in here is if you've got lots and lots of basil, is to dry your basil with this little contraption.
Oh, what is going on?
Is a dryer, all right, which allows you to make your dried tomatoes, which are these ones,
Look at them,
or these ones, and then the dried basil you can mix in there, because basil and tomatoes go really beautifully well. Or you put capers in, which are salted capers, because they're, again, one of those aromatic herbs, typically of the Mediterranean, that in fact add to tomatoes particularly well. So that'd be what you do with your green tomatoes.
And if you put in a fresh chili, that would be fine too. The chili won't go off as long as you use the same sort of process?
No, I would always pickle whatever I'm going to put in at the beginning. So if you want to put fresh chili in, that's perfectly fine.
Yeah,
but put it in under salt, and then you put it in under vinegar. And the beauty of that also is that that flavour of the chili will actually go through into the tomato, eggplant, zucchini, choco, whatever it is that you want to do. If you're doing chocos, I don't know if you've ever done chocos. Do you know the chocos?
I've never done chocos. I think my mother overcooked them too much when I was young.
No. These are raw. You don't cook them at all. So basically you do exactly the same as what I've done. Slice them. Just be careful because I'll make your skin peel, but that doesn't matter. Slice them, right? And you can either have them as a flat sheet or you can have them as julienne and put them in. But when you, rather than putting garlic, put onion in with the mix, because the chocos are really sweet. The onion is really sweet. And as a complement, they are beautiful. And then the herb that really goes well with chocos is, in fact, bay leaves. So when you've done all this, you put it in your thing, you put your olive oil on, you let it soak up, put a couple of bay leaves and put them in the jars and leave them. They are really fantastic. The other thing that you can do with tomatoes, obviously, and I think we need to talk about, I don't know how we're going for time.
Oh, we're going so well, so well. Don't you worry about that. You just keep talking.
So I think that, thank you. Okay, I can do that. So the next thing is the ripe tomatoes. You know, you've been picking tomatoes and you've made, you've made your flans and you do this, you do that, and you decide, no, I want to keep them. So the two ways that you can do that. One of them is dried tomatoes. Okay. Now
so we go back to your drying machine. But what if you don't have anything so sophisticated as?
Yeah, you don't have to have a dry. The beauty of the drying machine and doing them under vacuum seal is that, first of all, this doesn't leak.
Yeah.
Right. Whereas this morning this leaked everywhere. And secondly is that the oil is less likely to go rancid, because it will eventually go rancid. If I leave this for a year, for instance, this jar for a year, the oil will eventually start to change character and become rancid. This I can open in a year's time and it's almost as though I just did it yesterday. So it's worth having, and there's a few basic things. So you don't have to have a dryer, but I use a dryer also to do my dried apples, my dried apricots, peaches, and very rarely figs, but because we don't get a lot on the Mornington Peninsula.
So how does it work with your life there? I mean, just say it's a Tuesday night. You've had a busy day at the being a doctor.
I'm retired now.
Oh, what? Yeah. Let me have this romance. It's been a busy day. You've seen so many people. You've come home. What are you taking out of your pantry to cook for that night? What are you going to use?
So first of all, what I would do, and often I'd try and invite either one of the kids around or somebody, because it's always nice to be with people. Okay. So first of all, you do an antipasto. So I'd have some of my own small goods. I'd have got some either, I don't do prosciutto anymore. I do a thing called pulanello, which is a round meat, a round steak, and topside, maybe some salamis, maybe a bit of lombo, which is along the fillet. And so I'd have a few slices of that. I'd have a few, a handful of dried tomatoes.
A celebration of the pig. That's what you're saying.
Yeah,
a celebration
of the pig. Some tomatoes, the red tomatoes or green tomatoes. Maybe a half a dozen globe artichokes, which I pickle as well. And put them out, and that'd be the antipasto, often with bread that I make, because I make bread once a week. Then I would probably get one of these and use it in some way. Now, whether I make a stufato with it, whether I make a sugo with it, or I make a ragu, whether I use it, like last night there's an Italian equivalent of a paella, which I didn't realize this, called latiella, which means the fry pan. And that's basically what a paella is a fry pan. But there's an Italian version of it with rice, etc. So, you pour in some tomatoes in there with your vegetables, with your little bit of meat, with your potatoes and your rice, and you just make up this sort of, it absorbs all those beautiful flavors. But
almost
it's not
like a risotto, but you keep frying it.
Yeah, but you don't touch it. You just leave it alone. So I would use this, and we basically make a meal. Now, the beauty of this is that I can make a plate of pasta with effectively fresh tomatoes, which these will be, in the space of 15, 20 minutes, as long as it takes me to boil the pasta. So it's not as though I've got to come home and then start the whole process all over again. I mean, by the time I'm doing one thing, the kids are eating the antipasto, doing the pasta, it's all done.
It's fantastic. So what about on a sort of a Sunday, and you've got the whole glorious day in front of you, and you've got friends and family around, and you want to create a feast? Does that depend a lot on what season we're going through?
Absolutely.
Yeah. So take me through perhaps.
Okay. Is it divided on the season? If it's during the summer months, obviously you'd have more. You always have the basic, right? And the basic is, first of all, you've got the antipasti, which is all the preserved things. Now, obviously, if it's early in the season, then all of these things are relatively fresh, right? Course. So your tomatoes would be fresher. You might have a nice caprese, which is a fresh tomato with a bit of mozzarella, etc., which you can't have in the winter.
Fresh mozzarella.
You might have, you might have figs wrapped in whatever because you've got figs in the garden. So that's obviously a seasonal thing. Then you'd obviously have, then the next bit probably isn't particularly seasonal, although it can be. But, typically it would be, a lasagna or a ragu, which is basically you get up in the morning and you fry up maybe one or two different types of meat, maybe a bit of pork, which is not seasonal, obviously, maybe some. And it often really pork cuts, like chuck steak or stewing steak or whatever. And then you do what's called a battuto, which is your carrots, celery, and onion or garlic.
And you fry that all off together.
Fry that all off, and then you put your meat in and fry that up. And then you put, say, these. Now, these ones here, these tomatoes are whole, right? Or they're actually split in quarters.
So how did you create those?
Okay, so we'll go on to that one now. So you can... There's probably, for as many families as there are in Italy, there's probably that many different types of ways of doing your tomato preserve. And everyone has their own special way. I'm basically lazy. It's not true, but I like doing things simply. And also because then obviously I can get the grandkids to help. So what I do is these tomatoes here are the tomatoes that we use.
Gorgeous.
These are beautiful. Now, the thing is, I just want to speak for 20 seconds on tomatoes. Don't be conned into buying the so-called tomatoes from underneath, the so-called sauce tomatoes. You need to make sure that, and these actually got a little, having said all that, these are, I'll do one of my own, it's better. So you can see that this tomato here is almost all red, except for this little tiny little dubulaki here where it's attached, right? Which means that this is actually ripened completely on the plant. Whereas if you get something like that, there it is, you can see that there's all this white thing all the way along. That means that the tomato really didn't ripen on the plant.
Do you know
so
what?
This tomato won't have the same amount of sugar that this tomato has. It smells differently. This is a much sweeter smell.
And this is why some tomatoes taste like tomatoes and others.
Absolutely. In fact, the tomatoes, and I don't want to be sued by anyone, but I have read somewhere that the tomatoes that we buy in the supermarkets are specifically bred. Well, first of all, they're not ripe because they're sprayed so that they can pick the lot at the one time, and they all turn instantly red. And the other thing is that the lower sugar content that the tomato has the longer is the shelf life. So the tomato has been manipulated so that it in fact has a very long shelf life, but the cost has been the lower sugar levels and therefore the lower flavors. So people therefore obviously add sugar to their sauce, but it's not the same. It doesn't work. You know, these tomatoes, I just got these out of the garden, right? And if you cut these, look at that.
Yeah,
there's almost no white there at all. This is like I picked it an hour ago, right? These ones are better than most, right? These are the ones that my compadre bought for me that his relatives grow. They're better than most, but they're still not the very best. This is really what a tomato should look like, okay? It should be even, should be red, and, you know, basically, so that's worth preserving. Because the thing, of course, is there's no point preserving a tomato that doesn't taste like a tomato. All you're going to end up is a sauce that really doesn't taste like tomato sauce. So we now have these wonderful things, which are the open neck bottles. We didn't used to have those originally. They used to be all crown seals. And all I do is I put them in there like that, just literally
shove them in.
Not doing anything too exciting. And you can do this while watching the telly and, you know, the I Married You Last Christmas or whatever it is that they're currently. That's a nice tomato, right? And doing the same here. And I basically put there again, these are nice tomatoes. Then I get.
Have you done all of your tomatoes already this year or not?
Yeah. I'm picking some more this weekend and we'll do another batch. We normally do about 13 bubbles at a time, and 13 because it's 2 pots. So you've got that, and then what you do is you get this really high-tech thing called a spoon, wooden spoon, and you crush it, right?
You saw it here, friends. Peter with his high-tech kitchen skills.
This is the hard bit, you know. And unfortunately, you've got to really concentrate on this because you don't really want a lot of air bubbles. And then the next thing, you get some more of the tomatoes and you put them in, and you get until basically it's full. Okay, so you do the same thing again. And I'll do one more. It'll take. Look at that, beautiful.
Oh,
so
that is gorgeous.
Any white at all there. That's fantastic. Okay, so, oops. Now, when you do that, that's full now, okay? So there's not many bubbles. It's full. 2 things. One, don't overfill it, because as the contents expand, they'll push the lid up, which you don't want to do. So that's actually almost overfilled, right? I mean, it's going to be fine for the demo, but ideally you'd have it so that it's a good centimetre between the top of the lid and so back to there.
Yeah,
and
right.
The other thing is when this things squash like that, invariably you get little bits of tomato and skin that go along the edge. So when you put your lid on, it doesn't actually seal.
Yeah.
Okay? And the last thing is don't use this lid.
Yeah, dirty.
Use this lid. Well, not only is it dirty, but it's actually got some rust underneath the rubber seal, and therefore that won't seal. Okay, so then you do that, and you put that in your I haven't got it. No, I should have brought it out into a large pot, the largest pot that you have, and you bring the water up to a centimetre below the lid. Now, the important thing then is that you put it on the stove, and normally our pot takes 7 or 8 of these. I do 2 at a time, which is 13. So then what you need to do is put some paper or a towel on the bottom of the pan. Otherwise, as it rattles, you can actually end up breaking one of the bottles because there's a little indent there. That means that you get air in there, and the thing will go up and down.
That's a terrific tip, actually.
Right. So that's the first thing. Yeah. The second thing is that you put them in and you put water up to about a centimetre below the lid, and you then have to bring the temperature of the water in the pan, in the bowl, whatever, in the saucepan, up to boiling point, at a rate at which the centre of the bottle stays at the same as the outside. In other words, it takes 40 minutes.
I think that's what we want to know, the 40 minutes, about 40 minutes.
Yeah, but that's to get to boiling point.
Right.
Once it gets to boiling point, then it needs to be boiled for a full hour. So it takes an hour and 40 minutes to go from that to this, which is a sterile
and
bottle.
you've put nothing else in there. I mean, it's just...
No.
It's just
if you want to, you can put in basil, but I don't have that much extra. I'm going to do pesto with mine. Yeah. And again, a lot of people actually make the finished product. They put onion in and garlic and oil and whatever, and you end up with the full product. Well, that's fine, except that, you know, sometimes I don't want it that way. I want to do something different with it. I might want to do it with, you know, I might want to use it with fish, or I might want to use it with vegetables, and I don't want to use that to do it that way. Yeah. So this is all this is giving me the opportunity to have fresh tomatoes in the middle of winter. That's it, nothing more. Now, the important thing is one other thing is when at the end of the day, when it's done, so at the end of the hour and 40 minutes, this will be sterile, but it'll be hot. So I just turn it off and leave it. And then next morning I take it out. Now, the first thing I check is, can you hear that?
Yeah, the tap.
Okay. That's this little lid at the top. It's convex. In other words, it's going up like that. If it's actually sealed properly, it's concave. It goes inwards, and you can't do that. What that is it tells me that this bottle has reached and it's sealed under vacuum. So this will last 3 years. This will last 2 weeks, and it'll ferment and it'll go off. So if when you take them out, any of your lids are, you can do that to them. Either just put them in the fridge and use them straight away, or take the lid off, change the lid because it may be faulty, make sure that the edge is clean, put it back on again, and then you've got to go through the whole process again.
The boiling process again.
One of the criticisms of this process of doing the tomatoes is, first of all, I don't like it chunky. I like it smooth. Okay, well, this is a smooth sauce. This is actually a tomato ketchup that I make for my son, who is he's gluten-free, so he can't have onion because he's got fructose intolerance. So I make him this, and you can see that it's smooth. Well, all it's taken to go from there to here is a bar mix.
Yeah, that's right. There's nothing else.
It takes literally 10 seconds. This one here is my mother-in-law's recipe for ketchup. This is my allowance for the English heritage, who's 97, and that's her recipe. So, tomatoes can really be done in many ways. Now, one last thing is, when you do them this way, a lot of people say to me, "Oh, but Peter, you've got all this water on the bottom." Can you see the water on the bottom? Okay, that's not water. That's tomato juice, just that it's clear tomato juice versus pulpy tomato juice. So what I do is, you asked me before what I do when I come home. If I want a plate of pasta and I want to use this, what I do is I tip it out into the saucepan with the garlic, with the whatever I've got. Yeah. Usually if it's winter, it's basil. It's not basil, it's something else. But if there was any, although I preserve my basil under salt, so I can actually take it out and use it in the middle of winter. But the sauce is very watery, and really a pasta with tomato sauce that's watery is not really that nice, is it?
No, I think we can do better. I think you can do better.
Okay, so what I do and what I've been taught to do is that, in fact, if you get pasta and you put it in a bowl of water, it'll soak up 2 or 3 times its own liquid, right? So what I do is, if I have a pasta that needs to be cooked for, say, 8 minutes or 9 minutes, at 5 minutes, I take it out and I put it into this sauce that's cooking with the garlic, with the basil, whatever it is that's going, but it's a bit sloppy. And what I find is, in the last 4 minutes, the pasta will literally soak up all this extra liquid, and you end up with a really dry pasta, which is what you want. But more importantly, all those flavors are literally sucked into the pasta as well.
Yeah, delicious.
Right? And frankly, you can't overcook it because there's not enough liquid to overcook it. So you do a number of things. One of them is you can't overcook your pasta. Secondly, your pasta tastes nicer. Thirdly, all the sauce is dry, which is what you want it to be. And you haven't, in fact, sometimes I actually have to add a little bit of the water from the pasta into it to make it a little bit more liquid, right? But even that's nice because you end up with a slightly tacky sort of finish rather than, the old thing we used to do in the old days. You cook the pasta and you put the sauce on, and then hope for the best. I mean, that's not the way Italians do it, and it's not the way my parents have done it, and it's not the way it should be done. So therefore,
we're nearly running out of time, Pietro, but I've got a couple of questions that have come through in the audience that I just feel like that you could answer really quickly.
Yep.
The basil under the salt, preserving the basil leaves, because we've all got them at the moment.
Yep.
Take us through it.
Yep. So what you do is, hang on a minute, I'll show you if I can. There we go. So this is my leftover from last year. I'm not sure if you can see that.
Yeah. It looks a bit dark and gloomy down there.
It is, but but if I got you to smell that.
Beautiful.
Right. Now that's 12 months old.
Mm.
So what you do is you get your basil, you put the leaves in, you get salt, you put it on, literally just put salt, press it down and leave it. And you'll find
use the wooden spoon again.
Yes, you can, but you don't damage it too much. You don't want to you don't want to end up with a paste. You just want to basically leave it. And what will happen is that the salt will suck out a little bit of brine, which is fine. And then you leave it like that. You can also
no oil. There's nothing.
No. Yes. And you can mix that with rosemary. You don't need to because you can do rosemary fresh. You can put basil, parsley in there. But this is how I keep my basil. Then when I want to use it, I take 2 or 3 leaves out, which is usually a sprig, because I don't actually pluck it all off. I leave it in groups. So I know that when I take it out, it's 5 or 6 leaves. And the important thing is to remember that this is now very, very salty. So you don't add salt to your sauce, right? Or your beans or whatever you're cooking with it, right?
So when we're talking, the other question that I've got here, and a few people have actually asked me this, and it seems to be a bit of a trend that's happening across Australia at the moment, chili oil.
Okay. Chili oil, I basically make my own again, but what I do is I fry the chilies in the oil. I don't seep the chili in the oil. I've tried that a few times, and I find that what happens is it goes moldy. I don't know why. And whereas if you do the chili oil where you actually fry up the chilies in the oil and then leave them, so you can't leave a chili oil for 3-4 months, right? Mm. So what I do is I've run out, but I have a little bowl here, which I can't show you because it's empty, and I have chilies, either fresh chilies or dry chilies from last year. And we can talk about that really briefly at the end about how to keep your dry chilies.
Where to do the sewing from it. Yeah, we'll talk about
that. Exactly. Is you take 2 or 3 of those, you heat up your oil, you put them in your fry pan, and be careful that you don't wait until it goes dark to turn off the oil, because the oil will keep cooking the chilies. So once probably only takes 2 or 3 minutes. And then what I normally do is, if I want to, I can actually take a scoop of the chili and a scoop of the oil and put it in, and it's fresh. It's like when you go to a Chinese restaurant, you have the chili oil. I always find it really old and rancid. I really don't like it. But I do love chili with my food. So I make probably once every week or 2 weeks, I'll make a little batch of chili oil, and then I'll add it to my meal as I need it. But it's fresh.
So while we're still talking about the chilies, you go to Italy and you see these beautiful bunches of dried chilies, that look so beautiful. And then you come home and you think, terrific, I've had a bumper year. I'm going to string them up in my kitchen. They're going to look delicious and beautiful all year round. And then 2 weeks later, you take them down because it's mouldy. Tell us how to avoid.
Just wait there.
Everyone, drum roll, drum roll. We're nearly out of time, everybody that's watching. So if you've got any last questions, whip them through on that chat function, and we'll sort of test Pierre to see how quickly he can answer them. I'm not guaranteeing anything. Look at this. Why are your chilies looking like that? That's beautiful.
Okay, so first of all, they have to be really, really ripe and red. You can't do this with green chilies, okay?
Yeah.
That's the first thing. The second thing is that if you penetrate the actual skin of the chili itself, it'll go moldy.
Right, there it is. There it is, my friend. There's the
tip. So what you need to do is and I'm not sure if I can show you.
Yeah, no, you can sort of
see that you go through the actual stem. Yeah. So it's absolutely essential that when you get your thread, you actually go through the stem of the chili and not the actual chili itself. And if you do that, they won't go off.
Pietro, we've run out of time, but I just do want to ask you one more question that's come through from our audience that I love so much. She said, ask him, are any of your sons single?
No. Fortunately or fortunately, they're all happily with partners or wives. Two have children, and one of them, Sandra, the youngest, it doesn't have children. But yeah, no, unfortunately they're not they're unmarried but not available.
We have run out of time.
And nor am I, by the way. I might feel offended that they've asked about my sons and not me. I mean, that's a bit unfair.
I think it's because this person must be so familiar with your work that they know that you write about your wife so often.
You're right. You're right.
You're lovely, Lynn. Friends, we've run out of time today, but I do want to tell you to go out and make sure you do have this book in your cookbook collection. Why? Because it's actually the type of cookbook that you can read when you're on your way to bed, because there are stories in there from Italy, there are stories in there from Australia, from Pietro's family, and it makes it feel like you are sitting at the table slurping that beautiful tomato pasta down. To you who have become perhaps one of our most treasured people in Melbourne, thank you so much.
Thank you
for joining us today. I am going to get another T-shirt made up, and it's going to say, I stand with Pietro.
Oh, wow.
Yes, I am. I'm going to get that made up.
Yeah, wonderful. You're so kind. Thank you. Thank you very much to you and to Readings. I have to say they've been an amazing support, and to Mark, obviously, Mark Rubbo, an amazing support over the years. All I can say is I think we need to celebrate, but we also need to remember that, we are the end of a long series of people who've made sacrifices, decisions, made mistakes, had successes, and it's through their efforts that we're able to be, literally living in a land of plenty and enjoying it with our families, hopefully.
I think it's this humility that comes through in your writing as well. You're a very gracious man. Thank you for sharing so much.
It's a real pleasure. Thank you very much. Cheers. Bye.
Farewell, my friends. Farewell.